your host, Michael Braithwaite.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of On the Way Home. I'm your host, Michael Braithwaite. I'm coming to you. We're actually recording this podcast the day after the U.S. election with maybe not surprising results to some. Surprising to me, but the world is now forever changed. And we're not really a political podcast. We're not going to dive deep into that. We have a wonderful guest today. But before we get to that guest, I should tell you, I am from the wonderful organization called Blue Door. You get to check out all the different stuff we're doing at bluedoor.ca. We've been operating for about 42 years in the GTA, in York region, Peel and Durham region. We do everything from housing to healthcare to we've lifted 500 people out of poverty and into the construction industry through our pre-apprenticeship program, our Construct program, and much, much more. We're launching a land trust, knocking down a small house and putting up 14 stacked townhomes. We're moving forward at a rapid pace, as we should in our sector, because the need is so great. Let's talk about, and speaking of the need being so great, we don't know what that need is or what we really need unless we actually do a lot of the data and research. So often on the podcast, we have people who do that kind of work and share those reports year after year. Today we have Scott MacAfee, who's the chair of the National Advisory Council on Poverty. Scott's been on before, among many things in the council. And the council has representation across Canada and a really diverse brilliant group of individuals on that council. And every year, one of the pieces of their mandate is to do this national report on poverty and share that with the minister and come out with recommendations. So Scott and I talk about his journey into the sector. We talk about who's on the council, what it does, its mandate. We talk about the report, how they go about doing it, who they're talking with. We talked about how it was different a little bit this year than last year, and he talked about just feeling that kind of anger and desperation of vulnerable Canadians that things aren't changing fast enough. He talks about some of the recommendations moving forward, and there's some big recommendations in there. I mean, starting with kind of an income floor, which he knows is a lofty ask because it's very pricey. And then there's others just talking about access to all the different services that are out there, making that easier to access for Canadians in need, and so on, and much, much more. Listen, it's wonderful work from an incredible leader in Scott MacAfee. I think you're going to enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Let's go to that conversation now. Scott, thanks so much for making the time today to join us on the podcast.
Oh, you're most welcome.
You're a veteran of this podcast. I think pretty soon we're going to have to get you a 5-timers robe, as we do on the Way Home podcast. But it's interesting to see when we ask this first question to people, if it changes over time. I think there's some common themes, and that question is, of course, what does home mean to you?
Yeah, and since I've answered this a few times before, I thought about it a little differently this time, and I thought about home kind of really around the idea of belonging, so that a place where we belong and a place that belongs to us. But I think that that belonging piece really struck a chord this year because I've got a daughter going off to university, and then so her home will change, but she will always have a home, but the idea that where we feel safe and we belong and we have a place and a purpose, I think that's where I'm kind of landing on, right, at least at this moment, for my definition of home. But it's like you said before, it's fluid and it changes, and
absolutely.
But it's important.
Yeah, I mean, you think about that. What you're saying, how it always changes is fluid, right? Think of a couple of years back with COVID, right? Home changed differently. All of a sudden, it became all about safety, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it does change as the world changes around us. And as we record this podcast, this is the day after the U.S. election, where that definition might change a little bit too for so many because of what happened across the border.
That was I think looking at it from the upstairs apartment is a really weird dynamic, because I think we see things. I think we have a different perspective on how things kind of work and how things shape out south of the border, and how there's some real kind of challenging questions that they have coming up. I have a few friends that live in America, and they're talking about illegal immigrants and inflation as their two top priority items in their election, and how we are supporting people that and in their words don't belong. And I was like, well, I thought America was like, the idea of America was really to send me your poor huddled masses yearning to be free. And I think that's the vision that the world holds of America, but I'm not sure that's the vision America holds of itself anymore.
Yeah.
And not to get too political, but I think that I couldn't even believe it was close, and then I'm really kind of stunned by the outcome. So
I was bracing because I had read a lot of reports that this is the way it was going to go. I am so again surprised, but I was surprised at 2016, right?
yeah,
I mean, what do I know? Apparently not a lot because it keeps going that way. Common sense would say, as you said, this shouldn't even be close, but there's different issues, different way of thinking. I think different set of values as well. Let's talk about your set of values, Scott. Maybe just talk a little bit about your journey into this work. You've had quite you've done quite a few different things, all kind of related with common values. But let's hear about your journey.
yeah. So when I started kind of down this road, I was looking for a job. I had come off a couple of sales jobs, and I went into I actually applied to be the director of nursing homes for the province of New Brunswick, which was in hindsight like a ridiculous move, because I was like, way too young and way too inexperienced. I just had the requirements on paper. But I did get a job as working the front desk at Income Assistance. And so I did that, and I kept working and really feeling out the challenge that it was for people that were living kind of with lots of challenges. Um, and my job was to kind of greet them, figure a way to do it in a respectful kind of manner, with lots of dignity, and so from that, and those things stuck with me. I think building those relationships, being respectful, being curious, like what's going on, how are you doing today, and those questions permeate the work we still do, to the fact now that, and I always wondered about, like, I had 5-minute interactions with people, and then moved on to the case management, and then program consulting, and then provincial program management, and then now national. So it's really kind of digging into what makes a difference for the individual at the moment, and what kind of policy support or challenge that, and then what can we do about them, recognizing that policies they belong to us, right? They are our policies, so we've developed them, or someone's developed them in the past, and we're abiding by them, but doesn't mean they can't be changed or challenged. And I think so that's been kind of how I've gone through a lot of my career, being curious and respectful, and then trying to work for some change and impact.
Have been for the past few years. You have been the chair of the National Advisory Council on Poverty. Just congratulations! You've been
Thanks.
appointed for a second term, I believe. Second term or third?
Well, the second term was kind of in the middle of COVID. So I think they just kind of said, well, okay, we'll just keep going. But this is maybe, it's another 3 years. So I think it's a pretty positive.
Absolutely. And it speaks to the work that you're doing. You've been doing that. So tell us a little bit about the National Advisory Council on Poverty. Who are they, and what is the mandate?
Yeah. So we're a group of 10. Made up from people from coast to coast to coast. We have, we're pretty varied. We have people from, we have Marie Christian, who is a new member, with particular responsibilities for children and youth, who's from Winnipeg. Hannah Bray, who is a housing advocate, from the Old Mission Brewery in Montreal. Avril Colnut, who is a lawyer, civil rights-based lawyer in Calgary. We have John Cox, who's a disability advocate from Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. Kristen Desjardins de Klerk, who is now a professor or a professor, yeah, professor at University of Winnipeg, and was formerly from Cape Breton. Lindsay Kretschmar, who's from Toronto. Natalie Lachance from Montreal, who is a youth employment worker. Noah Lambundo, who is uh, a housing specialist out in British Columbia and an employment specialist, and then Quam McKenzie, who is the executive director of the Wellesley Center in Toronto. So we're varied. We have got lots of diversity on the council. I'm probably the most boring person on the council, and so we have 3 mandates. 4 really, but 3 provide independent advice to the Minister of Families, Children, and Social Development, so Minister Jenna Sudds. We report annually on the progress towards a 2030 goal of a 50% reduction in poverty. We have an ongoing conversation with Canadians about poverty. And then we have other duties as assigned. So we can get kind of sent on some missions, some fact finding, some engagement stuff from the minister at any time if there's something that comes up and she wants some advice or some opinion on. And we use the conversation with Canadians to really inform all the work we do, because although there's expertise within our council, I think the true expertise within how do we move people from poverty to prosperity or thriving exists within the hearts and minds of the people that are living the experience. And they know probably what's best for them at the moment. And then we try to take those ideas that they share up to policy levels and then try to change policies that are holding them back.
And listeners, we've talked about this before. I mean, it all kind of starts and ends with policy, right? Good policy can make great things happen. Bad policy, well, we've seen what was happened in poverty and homelessness over the years as a result. Let's go to one of those pieces of your mandate, the annual report. We want to talk about that this year. Can you talk about the process? What happens with that report? How do you put that together?
Yeah, so we always start the report. We figure out like where we want to go, who we haven't seen before, who we haven't talked to. This year we went to Whitehorse, Calgary, St. John's, Halifax, and Truro, Nova Scotia. So we got some urban, rural, some northern, some like really urban. So downtown Calgary, and then we just talk to people, people that are living in poverty, people that have moved out of poverty, people that are struggling to stay out of poverty, and we talk to organizations that support them, and also government organizations and different levels of government, municipal, provincial, territorial, that are working on these same issues from a different angle. And so when we talk to people, we're asking them about their experience, about what they think their challenges are, what they think could help them, how we could support them to be better, do better, live a more fulfilling and life.
Okay, and start to finish, how long? Like, are we 6 months?
So even just the production of it is 4 months. So I think that's a challenge. We usually start in around the fall. So last year we're in Yellowknife at the end of January. So it was like usually the engagement process starts in the kind of in the late fall, winter, and goes over the winter, and then we've kind of finished our report by the end of April, writing the report. So we get all the information. It gets all correlated and combed through by ourselves and the awesome secretariat that supports us with ESDC. We have multiple conversations that bring us down to kind of get into some of the key themes, and then we try to figure out what the policy levers are that could impact those themes. We've also this year, and then every year, we've also done virtual engagements. So we try to reach out to a lot of people that way as well. And we've talked to hundreds of different service providers this year, looking at overarching issues. And we've done it differently in every year. Some year we go to the policy experts first and say, what are the big things in your mind, and then take that to the people. And some years we go to the people first and say, what's at the top of your mind, and then bring it to the policy experts and say, okay, now what are the levers that we can move this? And we've done both, and they both have their pluses and minuses. But I really like to focus on the individual first, and then try to figure out, so they don't have to figure it themselves. Because I think people, they've got enough stuff to worry about. This year particularly, we heard a lot more about the struggle for survival. Like, it wasn't like in the past there would be like, well, you could do this or do this, but people this year were really just struggling and trying, and just right in pure survival mode in some places. And that was it felt a lot heavier this year. And that's what I came back after the 2 weeks on the road, and felt heavy, and the hopelessness that permeated the conversation this year was really palatable, and you really felt for a lot of people that were going through tough times, struggling with food's more expensive, housing more expensive, transportation's way more expensive, like getting around, like jobs are easier to find, but they don't pay enough, and so you have to find a few of them, and so that hasn't kept up with the even with the prices that they have to pay to feed their family or house their family, and that's a challenge. And people think, like, if I work, I should be able to get this done. I should be able to make this work. That's the idea that we've had put in our heads for a long time, that if you work, you can live. And for some people that aren't able to work, it's even a bigger challenge. But if you're working all the time and you're still having a hard time making ends meet, it's a real mental challenge as well.
Absolutely. And we just had a couple of gentlemen on talking about rental wage, and really what they're talking about is that gap, as you're saying, right, between here's the minimum wage, here's the wage you need to afford an average apartment, and that wage continues to grow year over year. They do a similar report, and they're seeing that. So I could feel that people are hurting. I remember speaking to Nick Falvo during the pandemic, and he said, I think the greatest stress will not be felt from this pandemic till 3 or so years after the pandemic kind of comes to an end. And I think, would you agree that's some of what you're seeing now is our most vulnerable are really, really feeling the pinch?
Yeah. And I think, multiple reasons. And I always push back on the idea that it was CERB that has caused all this turmoil and not the pandemic, right? It was a response to the pandemic. And CERB was an income replacement that everyone needed, that we needed at that time, because we're trying to keep people safe and away from work, away from congested places. But I think that a lot of that inflation was being blamed on people living in poverty, and it was just like, so that doesn't really work out. Like it's what we have to change that narrative. And I think that a lot of people got comfortable with working from home, having more disposable income, spending more things. And then businesses decided that, well, listen, we lost money for 3 years. Let's try to recoup that as fast as we can. And I think that hasn't really been played out. Like, we're seeing record profits for a lot of businesses at the same time as we're seeing, record inflation for food, housing, medical, and personal supplies. I don't think it's fair. And I think that a lot of and maybe fair is the wrong word, just. I think that if businesses are benefiting, then they should share that benefit with their employees through wages, through corporate social responsibility. It seems to be all going to the money's going away and not staying with the people that earn it or make the products and buy the products. So, but that may sound a little kind of more left wing from me, but I see it and the impact that it's playing out in communities as detrimental, that we aren't paying people enough to live, but we're charging them more and at the same time charging them more to do it, and that just doesn't make any sense. And then we complain about it, and about the results that happen with encampments, or asking for notwithstanding clauses from governments to enact things to outlaw encampments. But encampments are just homes, and it's just someone feeling safe somewhere, and they have to have somewhere to live. And if we're not going to supply the wages to enable them to do it in the market economy or control the market economy so that people can afford it, then we'll have to figure out how to deal with the consequences.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you mentioned the non-withstanding clauses, right? We're talking about, and I think I remember having a conversation with a mayor who's very reasonable, and he was saying, "Look, like, I understand encampments. We have to have places for them. Like, we have to have a variety of different housing options, and
Yeah.
I'm all for that." He said, "But does that mean you can put an encampment anywhere? What are the, how can you work through that with people?" And one of those ways is not that law and order. As one of the mayors said, how do we just put somebody in a place to move them along? And I'm like, move them along to where? To where?
Yeah.
And if you're talking about people here, you're not talking about, raccoons or something. These are human beings, right? So it's such a non-human approach to this. And until, as you said, we have jobs that pay the wages they need to actually prevent and escape poverty, until we have the housing that people could truly afford, right? Like, this is going to continue to be a challenge for sure. Let's talk about the report. Lots to learn. You talked about some of the differences, that feeling this year versus last year. Were there other pieces that, or what was similar? What are you saying we haven't really moved the needle on, and what was that? And what are any other things that were a little different this year?
Well, I think that we hear the same things over and over again. I think the desperation this year was the big difference, and the fact that people want solutions now. Like, it's not like, we heard a lot of, well, we've already told you this, and they haven't told us that specifically from the National Advisory Council on Poverty, but they have shared their views with municipal, provincial, territorial, and different federal governments. So they feel like they're being kind of over consulted a little bit, and we heard, and some of that kind of came back in the way of anger and frustration. I got yelled at a lot more this year than I usually get yelled at. Um, but and I understand, because I'm coming to a place. I'm not from that place. I represent a federal body that people assume can help them, and that has, or that some, for some reason, hasn't been helping them. Um, and I think so that was a little different this year. I think that if we can, there's some things that we made recommendations on, we changed up our recommendations this year. They weren't kind of as kind of broad. We got more specific with some of them this year, and that was really intentional to try to really promote some action, because there's things that we can do long term, but there's things that we need to do right now, because people are feeling that pinch right now. And if we can't get people out of survival mode, then we can't get people into a place where they can actually consider what's going to happen in the next month, in the next 3 months, in the next year. You can't get people looking at, medium and long-term thinking until you can solve their immediate survival needs. And so we started talking about a little bit about thriving needs. Like, so what are those things that people need to thrive, beyond surviving? Because I think that really keeps your head down. You're thinking about the next moment. You're thinking about the next meal, or the next night. But we need people to be able to be comfortable enough in that situation so they can consider what happens next. Education, employment, a lot of pro-social things, if they can. And if not, we have to figure out ways to support them through that Canada Disability Benefit, Canada's Workers Benefit. Like, there's a lot of benefits available to people if you can access them. And so then we got into some access stuff, and then we got into some adequacy stuff, and then we kind of moved on and okay, so what else is missing? And then community and equity, and I think that a lot of those things we saw a lot more of well, this is about me. So more kind of less community and more individual focus on some of the talk we heard this year. Well, they have theirs, why can't I have mine? And so it felt like the end of the pandemic, when we were trying to protect ourselves rather than protect our neighbors. And I don't think that's good for our country. And I think that divisiveness, I think we've just witnessed what it looks like when it hits the political spectrum yesterday. And so if we can actually come together, we're always better together. It's just more difficult, and we have to figure out the way through together as opposed to figuring our own way through apart. And that was a
Yeah, I mean,
very long
so
answer.
no, no, it's great. I mean, but it's so hard. I mean, when you're in it, you're thinking that's all you can see, right? Like it's straightforward, not seeing
Yeah.
all these things around you. Now, one of the goals to your report, of course, is to come out with a set of recommendations that you then take to the minister, right? To say, hey, here are things. Let's talk a little bit about some of those recommendations. I'm sure there's some consistency saying we have to continue to push, but are there any new ones? Or let's talk about the recommendations.
Yeah, I think that we got more specific this year, as I said. We still call for the basic income floor. We call for an overall increase in benefits, but also in targeted benefits for different groups that have been made most marginal. And we thought we could do that through the Canada Social Transfer, up to and look at to hit that to at least a percentage, established percentage of the market basket measure, if you want to measure it. Talked about flexibility, really, in the idea that we need to be more flexible, because people, like, poverty is an individual experience of a systemic inequity. So if we're looking at the systemic inequity, we need to figure out what's the individual experience and how can we make the system work for the individual and not make the individual work for the system. I think that's kind of not new, but I think we reiterated that quite a bit. We also kind of got into the idea that we needed to show people what's next, because I think, like, we had the Canada Disability Benefit come out. It came out, that's a big deal. Like, so, but it wasn't as accessible or available and adequate as people had hoped. So we need a plan to how we're going to bring that up to a level like that, like they did with Canada, Canada Pension Plan or the Guaranteed Income Supplement. Like, we need to bring these benefits that we have up to adequate. We also talked about separating mat leave from EI, because I'm not sure how having a baby and or being a parent and working have anything to do with each other, but we've lumped them into the same system, and then we've kind of forced a lot of parents and kids to live for the first year of their lives in poverty, just because they were working before they got pregnant or before they decided to have a family. We talked a lot about housing challenges, but we're more specific this year. So we wanted to target those that are in the core housing need the most. Looked at some federal rental subsidies. With food, we thought that, like, when we were in Newfoundland, they talked about the food miles that go onto it, but also the expiry dates. It takes a while to get stuff to Newfoundland. It takes a while to get stuff to Whitehorse. So we talked about, like, maybe we could regulate, not maybe, we recommended that we regulate items that were in the nutritious food basket. So if we think they're enough, that people need these foods to live and to be healthy and to thrive, we can't have people price gouging on everything. And the National School Food Program, we talked about that. Great program. It's a great program that's going to enable kids to go to school and learn while fed, so they can think about learning and not about being hungry. So there's some good pieces in that. We thought it'd be, open it up, make sure it's fully available for everyone, make sure it's culturally appropriate, and that it makes sense and it's deliverable, and kind of some standardization, some consistency to it. We also talked about access to benefits. So we talked about auto filing, auto enrollment, auto filing of taxes, auto enrollment and programs. So if the government already has all your information, because they do, all your T forms, they have them, and then if you're eligible for a program, you should just get it. Like, they should fill your taxes and get your benefits to you. There's a lot of people, even the Canada Child Benefit, which has a really high uptake, I think it's 97%. That's still 3% of kids in Canada that don't get it, for no good reason, really, because we know what their parents' income was. We know what a lot of their things are, so we can probably do that. And we also thought that there's a lot of systems that need navigation. So we thought about funding system navigations, And then we went to nonprofits. So we saw a lot of nonprofits this year. We talked to a lot of people. A lot of nonprofits, people working at nonprofits were starting to use the service of the nonprofits. That's the first time we heard that. And that it didn't seem like they complained about it. They were wondering about that are we being paid enough to help this sector of, and then we're not valued enough to be paid enough to not have to use the services of our own nonprofit. And not there's anything wrong with it. That's what it's there for. But they challenged that idea that they weren't being paid enough. So we talked about stable long-term funding for the nonprofits. We talked about fair, equitable wages, reducing the administrative burden, and really support innovation, because there's a lot of innovation going on there. Nonprofits are very entrepreneurial. They learn by doing, and then when they learn better, they do better, and then they do better for everyone. So I think that was another big piece of our recommendations. And the last piece, that division we talked about. We heard a lot about the division in Canada and how everyone's starting to think kind of more individually. We thought that community would need it. So we want to build strong communities and really enable equity more, because there's lots of groups that have been left behind for a long time. So initially we talked about respecting treaty rights, and then supporting Indigenous leaders to reduce poverty in their own communities in their own way. And then we also developed a plan to address any poverty inequity. And that was kind of the last of our recommendations. So I think that they were more targeted this year, but still kind of brought into a lot of the same things that we've talked about in the past. Less data and more action. Maybe that's a fair way to sum up this year's report.
Love it. Less data, more action. And so what are the hopes moving forward? You take these recommendations, you provide them to the minister and the team. What are your hopes that from this around action?
Yeah, I'm a hopeful person by nature, but I think that we need to make sure that it makes sense. Like we provide these recommendations in the hopes that it can enable political courage, because some of these things aren't going to be palatable. Some of these things are initial upfront investments in long term, and not savings, but in long term thriving of Canada. Like these are some of it's nation building, really. So we need to figure out how we do these things in a way that makes sense for the people that are living the situation, but also for all of us, because these are the things that I think make us a better country. These aren't like, they're not terribly things. They're not things that should be debated. These are basic. This is what it means to be a human. This is what how we connect to our shared humanity, how we get better as a country, and more peaceful and graceful and loving as a country. And I think those are the pieces that we're trying to move forward. Hopefully we've put some ideas forward that can be acted, and that the people that are living the experience currently can see some relief from that experience that isn't always great, as soon as possible.
Do you ever break, like, say, here's kind of things we hope immediately. These are kind of smaller things that are a little easier. All right, we should do access, but these are kind of the bigger ticket that are going to cost a lot. We know. Is it broken down like that in kind of stages, or?
Yeah, well, I think that an income floor, that's a big ticket item, right?
Big time, yeah.
But also it will require a lot of study, because you're putting it in a basic income floor into, like, for example, Ontario, where social assistance is administered in municipalities.
Yeah.
Then you put it into like hundreds of systems. Like, how does that work? And what does it mean? Like, I think that even like there's basic guaranteed base annual income, there's basic income, there's universal basic income. There's a lot of different, depending on which group you're with, there's a lot of different ideas for that one thing. And an income floor, negative tax, like there's a lot of different ways to do it. So I think it'll take some time to study. But in the meantime, we shouldn't make people fall further and further behind. We shouldn't. Yeah. We should make sure that we put interim measures in place that bridge them, because this kind of ideas of these big kind of nation building or huge policy pieces, like Medicare, like Like that didn't happen overnight. There's interim measures that got us to that point. A guaranteed income supplement. It wasn't there day one. Disability benefit. It's not there right now. But we need to make sure that we show people where we're going and why we're going there. And I think that will enable some hope. And that hope piece is going to be huge as we move forward. So that people, like what I'm hopeful for change is I'm hopeful that our recommendations can provide a glimmer of hope and kind of maybe a road forward for some, but also something to kind of hook onto and say, okay, this is where we can go. And how do we move that along? And as an organization, how do we do that? How do we improve access or low barrier entry, or how do we be more diverse, be more equitable in our service delivery? I mean, I think that, and we've had this conversation before. I'm all about the know better, do better, and I think that if this report is able to help people know a little bit better, then and this is not the advice coming from it is the advice coming from the council, but it's also coming through the council from Canadians about what they want now to improve their life today and tomorrow and for the future. So,
and you're making it unignorable in a sense. Like, to use the United Way's old slogan was, it's hard to ignore all this information, right? And I think let's also focus on, there's been a lot of, despite our vulnerable Canadians feeling frustrated, and it's tough, but a lot of pieces over the years, right? You mentioned, yes, the disability piece. The advocates were saying way too, like, not close, but it's forward. It's moving forward instead of back. And there's a lot of pieces that if you take those together, the reduction of poverty, it's been kind of well thought out, and there's been things put forward. So yeah, I think we have reason to remain hopeful that these things can happen. Now, let me ask you, with the council, of course, nonpartisan, but we're most likely going to see a new government federally in the next 6 months to a year. You guys just full steam ahead? Business as
I think that's one of the biggest things about the council is that nonpartisan piece. I think because we're not political. Like we're people focused. We want to. It's not about a party. It's about the country. It's about the whole country, and then figuring out how we can do that together. But yeah, I'm not sure how it will change, except that like everything, it will. And I don't see it as I don't ever see change as positive or negative. It's just change, and then people adapt, people adopt, people keep going. Like, it's not like it won't kind of change the day to day, or it may. And but if you get hooked up, and I heard this early on in my career, don't figure out what's going to happen. Figure out what you're going to do. So then, because you can control what you're going to do, but you can't control what's going to happen. So if you're tied to what's going to happen, then you'll almost always fail. But if you're tied to what you can do, then you'll always succeed.
That's sage advice. And let me tell you, I mean, every time I talk to you, I'm like, they have the right person sharing this council. So I love your hopeful attitude and positive attitude. And hey, here's who you're never forgetting about, the end user that you represent, and that's so appreciated. If people want to take a look at the report, read through the report, share it as we would like them to do, where can they get it?
Yeah, so it's on our. We have a ESDC webpage. I'll share the link. I should have shared that last night when Leah sent me that note, but I didn't. Also with a headshot, and I'll get all that stuff in. But so we have a web. You can just look up, if you look up NACP poverty in any search engine, you'll get to see us. And then our latest report, a need for urgent action, went live like last week, and so and it's there. But you can also read through our previous reports. There's an executive summary that's probably an easier read than the 160 pages of the report.
It's appreciated. Yeah.
If you really want to get into it, then that's it. But yeah, so it's there, and if you want to reach out, then to me, I'll share all my socials as well. But I'm also open to getting emails from people to talk, because I think that's it's part of the deal, but it's also how we get better. Like, if we don't know the experience of the individual, how are we supposed to, provide policy recommendations to help that individual? And
Yeah.
I think that's what the key is, right? So we need to figure out how to be better together and not be, individually better without.
And that's a good spot to end, Scott. Thank you so much to you and the council for year after year putting these together, making their recommendations, pushing government and policy to be better for all of us. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.